The fall of Saigon triggered a mass exodus of Vietnamese boat people, with over 1.5 million refugees fleeing by sea, many resettling in the United States, Canada, Australia, and Europe. My next guest was one of the few American journalists to witness the collapse of Saigon. He was covering the war at the time for NBC News. Here's my conversation with journalist Jim Laurie.
I met Lory at our studios in Washington, D.C.
So Jim, take us back in time. Late April 1975, the fall of Saigon. If you can, start with was the momentum building? Could you anticipate what was going to happen? What was it like to be there on the ground?
Well, first, I was in Cambodia, and there the Khmer Rouge began to encircle the city, and by the 12th of April, it was surrounded. So a friend of mine, a cameraman, great cameraman from Australia named Neil Davis, we decided to go into Vietnam. So on the 25th of April, we flew into Saigon from Hong Kong for NBC News. And NBC, gracious as they were, said, "You can do this. We don't recommend that you stay on in Vietnam through the communist takeover. And by the way, we're going to cancel your insurance policy." Having said that, we had made this commitment to stay. And we were there for 4 days, and things were getting very, very tense. Everybody in Saigon was in total panic mode. People were trying to find any way they could to get out of the country. The North Vietnamese troops had surrounded the city on all fronts. The American ambassador was delaying the departure of the embassy because he was still hoping there could be some negotiated end to the war. There was no prospect of that, but he held out that hope. Finally, it was announced on the 29th of April that the American embassy would have to leave. And this enormous helicopter airlift began, first from the airfield in Saigon. That was bombed. Artillery shells came in. They shifted all operations to the U.S. Embassy. They had 2 helicopters coming in simultaneously, the big Chinook choppers, taking out 45, 50 people per helicopter. And this evacuation went on for 24 hours. They got 7,000 people in all out of the embassy within a 24-hour period. And we watched, Neil and I, we watched as all that happened. And we had decided to stay on after the last American left.
Jim Lory is now a media consultant. In 2020, he published a memoir about the 1970s, The Last Helicopter, 2 Lives in Indochina.
So you have a sense, okay, if we play our cards right, we'll be okay. But there's a lot of people who want to escape. Give me a sense of what that fear's like, where everyone's racing to try and get on these choppers. Not everyone's going to make them. Many did not.
This was the hard part for me. People who had spent 20 years with the Americans, working for the American embassy or one of its agencies, with the U.S. military, people who depended upon America for their lifeline. And in their view, what was happening is the Americans were cutting and running and leaving them behind. Now, yes, 7,000 or so, 5,000 or so were rescued within that 24-hour period, but many hundreds of thousands were left behind. It was very, very similar what we experienced much later, only a few years ago, in Afghanistan, where hundreds of thousands of people who were dependent upon the American 20-year commitment were being left behind. And this was the feeling that I got at that time. People coming to me, "Can you help me get out? Can you help me get out?" "No, I can't help you get out. I don't know what's going to happen." I said, "Well, you're going to have to see what kind of new government this is going to be coming in." And there was so much panic. People just didn't know what was going to happen. And of course, the Americans, they pushed the idea that things would be horrible because they wanted to have this narrative, the communists are evil, and you're going to be trapped in this. So there was a sense of the Americans pushing this narrative, and yet the Americans getting out, leaving behind thousands of people.
You mentioned you were in your 20s at this time. When I was in my 20s as a reporter, I was covering city council meetings and board of supervisors. This is pretty heady stuff for a young guy, a reporter to be in Vietnam. And I think probably our viewers are wondering, how does that happen? I mean, how does a young guy like you land over there at such a consequential time?
Well, I was a Asia studies guy from university. My focus was China and Japan, and that was my area. So I went out to Asia. I got very bored with academia. I just could not stand reading another book. I wanted to see for myself what was happening. And I got out first to Japan, then to Taiwan, then to Hong Kong, and I ran out of money. But I was offered a job for $250 a week if I would go to Vietnam. And I said, well, I don't know all that much about Vietnam, but I ended up going to Vietnam. And it was, to my mind, looking back upon it, the best decision I made, just to go and see what this war was all about, but most importantly, what the people were all about. I became very much enamored both with the Cambodian and the Vietnamese people.
As Vietnam had been a French colony until 1954, the Fall of Saigon symbolized the final collapse of France's historical influence in Indochina.
Jim, not far from here, of course, is the Vietnam Memorial. We see tourists coming from all around the world to go there. What do you feel when you go and see that site?
Well, when you see the place that marks the deaths of more than 50,000 American service people, it's obviously emotionally impactful. But I have to say, you look at it and you say, what a waste. A war that, by my reckoning, was really not necessary. And then I think, of course, of the millions of people, Vietnamese and Cambodians, both combatants and civilians, who were killed during that long war. You're talking about a 20-year period of war after the French left, and it was devastating. And if you drive up and down Vietnam today, as I have, you'll see hundreds of small cemeteries where Vietnamese soldiers are buried.
You've covered many wars, Vietnam, Cambodia, but many more after that. What are some lessons about war reporting that you think other journalists should know that you know?
Well, clearly you're balancing your own safety with trying to get the story. And I always tell young people, do not take the crazy risks. Do what you can, report what you see. Don't go beyond reporting what you see, because there you get into dangerous territory and you're engaging in commentary, not pure reporting. So I always try to report either what I saw or what I was told directly, and not venture very far from those basic guidelines.
I think all of us would agree it'd be nice if there was no need for a war reporter. What do you think it is that we constantly see these wars? We're still seeing them today.
Now that's a really tough question, Mike. Clearly, wars come about for a number of reasons. Territorial ambitions, of course, probably come number one. Security issues, perceived security issues. Religion is a constant feature of many of the wars that I've covered, in the Middle East, for example, or in Bosnia. So these three factors have been with us for thousands of years, and they're not likely to go away.
Iconic images like the helicopter on the U.S. Embassy roof and civilians scrambling to escape became symbols of the war's chaotic end. The fall inspired films like The Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now.
Jim, talk to me about the challenges you faced as, everything's unraveling. People are coming to you. Can you help us? And what that kind of fear is of being in something like, it's a cauldron. I mean, you're right there in the middle of all this. You don't know how things are going to go. What's that like?
Well, it's a very emotional experience, first of all, because I was well connected with these people, and they really needed help, and they felt that their lives were in jeopardy. As it turns out, many of them were okay and they were safe. The regime that came in was not quite as bad as they had feared. But for me, it was difficult dealing with all of these people. Then my second consideration at the time was, I have to file a story on all of this. Now, unlike today, where you can file a story if you have a cell phone anywhere in the world, back in those days, it was 16 millimeter film. Film had to be processed. You had to get it out of Vietnam to do so. And worse, the North Vietnamese cut all communications within an hour of taking over the city of Saigon. So I had my last dispatch out, which said they're taking over the city, the surrender is underway, and that was the end of my transmissions, which were audio transmissions only from Saigon, the last transmission for 5 days. But when they reopened the transmissions, it was only via telex. I'm not sure many viewers recall what a telex is, but it's a way of getting things out in print, but not radio or television. So we had to wait, and we kept asking the Vietnamese if we could get our story out, get our film out. It needed to get to Hong Kong or to Tokyo or Bangkok for processing and then satelliting. Well, it took us 26 days. And on the 26th day, I went out with it, got all the film out. We did a special. And the special, back in the day, there used to be a guy named Johnny Carson on the air at 11:30 p.m. at night, New York time. And we preempted Johnny Carson with our special 26 days in communist Vietnam.
You said that you didn't like reading the books in academia. You wanted to go live the life. But you wrote a book about your experience in Cambodia, The Last Helicopter. And one of the things that struck me about your book, which I really liked, was the fact that you're still living a life in a war zone. You're having a relationship, you're going out to dinner, you're actually planning, like, this is going to happen, this is going to fall. We need to be prepared, and you've got a plan in place, and then it goes haywire and your girlfriend's left behind. So you also have that sense, I think, as a journalist of what the people are going through in Saigon, what that frenetic feeling is like. Give us an idea of what it's like to be in a war zone, because you do kind of maintain a life, but then there's insanity mixed in, right?
Now, I've been doing this on and off since 1970 in Vietnam and Cambodia. 2 different wars, really. 2 different routines. If you're a young, as I was, green, beginning reporter, you try to spend as much time out of Saigon, out of Phnom Penh as you can, out of the capital cities, because the stories to be had are out in the countryside, out on the battlefields. So it was very unusual. The Vietnam War was very unusual for journalists because we had carte blanche with a ID card issued by the U.S. military. We could take a helicopter or a plane pretty much and go wherever we wanted to. Unlike the Afghan War or the Iraq War or more recent wars, it was not an embedded system. You had the right, according to the ID, to go wherever you wanted. So you'd spend a lot of time in the field at fire bases with U.S. troops, with Vietnamese troops, sometimes with Cambodian troops. Cambodia was very different because the action was very close to the capital city of Phnom Penh, whereas the action usually in Vietnam was some distance away, requiring a helicopter lift. In the case of Phnom Penh, you could actually get up in the morning, get into a car, put in the trunk of the car some beer and Cokes, so you had something to drink on the way, and go out literally to the command posts at battlefield locations which surrounded the city of Phnom Penh by about 20, 30 miles. So it was a more dangerous way of covering the war, but it was an easier way to get back to the city by sundown. You always were back by sundown. Nobody ever stayed out anywhere in Vietnam or Cambodia after dark. That was far too dangerous wherever you went. And you'd get back to file your story. Usually I would be filing radio stories or print stories. TV stories took longer. That has to be shipped out of the country. But no, a routine evolved where you would go to military briefings, which would tell you what was not happening. And then you'd go taking tips from these briefings and plan little trips off to do stories in the field. And that's the routine that existed. And then you'd come back. I mean, the beauty of old-fashioned television, of course, was you weren't filing all the time. You didn't have a cell phone. You weren't, you had no ability to file. So once sun went down, you had an evening to yourself. You had to be ready for the following morning. You might have to get your story out on the 6 p.m. Cathay Pacific flight to Hong Kong. But the evening was basically yours. You could have some kind of personal life in the evening hours.
One final question, the narrative about Vietnam, and I've had the chance to chat with you about this before because there's been series about it, that all too often it's such an American-centric view, and you point out, the suffering that still continues in that country. Should that change, and would that have an impact on American foreign policy if people were not so siloed that they just had the Western perspective always?
But this has been a sort of traditional problem with American foreign policy makers. They do not see things from the perspective of the nations about which they're making policy, whether it be Cambodia or Vietnam or China. They don't see the other perspective. It's all from an American point of view, an American very much egocentric point of view. I believe that one of the reasons why we got into the Vietnam War in the first place was we did not listen to the French, who gave warnings about what had to be done in Vietnam, and we did not really know the country, the culture, the nationalism, the determination they had to be a non-colonial nation, to be a nation that stood up for itself. You go to Vietnam today, it is an economic miracle, very similar to what has happened in China over the course of the last 40 years. It is a dynamic society of hard-working, highly literate people, and it is nothing like what it was in the 1970s.
Jim, thanks so much.
Thank you.